Hey, how's it going? My name's Shane Thompson, and I drive a white RX 7FC. It's a little run down, but it gets the job done. I'm really into like grassroots drifting. I don't like a lot of big name drifting and all that stuff. I try to keep it as simple as possible. It was originally a NA motor, and I wanted to go a little bit faster after tackling it and just generally driving it every event and going through different pairs of different pairs of wheels and everything, and finding different specs and all that. And I kind of got it down for being NA and everything, and I drove it pretty fast, but it pretty much held me back quite a lot as a driver. I mean, being NA and everything, like, I recommend going out driving whatever you have and all that. Like, if it's NA, go drive it. After a while, just all the skills and all that stuff you learn, it starts hindering your performance and everything. So I wanted to go a little bit faster, and I decided to try turboing it myself. I tried having a shop do it first, and they didn't want to get into my timeline. So I was like, you know what, let me go take the car back from them, and I stole it at night. I basically went there and I went to go see if the car was either in the shop or out of the shop. I saw that it was still parked in the same spot that I left it, with keys in it and everything. And I was like, well, I'm just gonna take it. So I took it. The rotor was broken and all that. It was like down a rotor, so it like had a really bad hop to it. It drove all the way home, parked in the garage, and then like next morning, because I texted the guy, I want to come pick it up. And the guy was like calling me and blowing my phone up going, yo, you can't do that and everything. I can call the cops and all that. And I was like, no, this is my car, man. Like, you didn't touch anything. So I was like, well, I'm just gonna take my car. But I learned that he took my Turbo 2 housings out of the car that he was gonna use to rebuild them. And I had to go back to the shop. My girlfriend went back to the shop, and I guess when she got there, like, they were all kind of standing outside saying like, oh, your boyfriend can't come out and like pick up his own car at night and all that, or after hours. And she goes, well, he can do whatever the fuck he wants. Like, he didn't work on it. So I was like, all right, whatever. So they handed her all the parts, and then I started ordering a few parts and everything. A week later, everything kind of came in, and that's when I was like, well, let me just try to do it myself. So I pulled the motor. It didn't take too long. I pretty much got everything kind of laid out and set up in less than like a day. And then this was the time where I got fired from my job. I didn't want to go like get another job and like stop the process. So I was like, well, let's just see how far I can go with a little bit of money. So I went as far as I possibly can, but I ended up getting another job and everything. Motor-wise, it took me less than 3 days. One day was to tear it apart, clean it, and then second day was prep everything so I know like everything's good, like housings, irons, and all that. And then after that, I started building it and everything. And I technically rebuilt this twice. The first time, I didn't realize that the oil control rings go a certain way on the rotor. So I put them an opposite way, and I guess when the spring didn't catch, it would just start spearing oil all over, and it was just a trail of white smoke. But so after that day, I was like, oh, well, maybe I messed something up really bad. But then I was like researching it, and they said, oh, the oil control rings could be like wrong. And I was like, oh no. So pulled the motor again, took it all apart, which I reused basically everything. I made sure to like label stuff, because one side is different from the other. But I made sure to label everything, make sure everything's good, took everything apart, cleaned all the old gunk, or the new gunk now. Flipped the control rings the right way. I bought new springs, so they're brand new instead of the old ones that got smushed down and broken. And pretty much put it all back together, did the same thing, swapped it back in. It took me less than a day and a half to get everything done and running again. And right after I started, it smoked for about like 10 seconds and then it stopped. And after that, like, it ran perfect. A week later, took it to CFT in Orlando and got him to tune it. On Mustang dyno, it made 195. So like horsepower wise, like on a regular dyno, I think it's like you add like 20 horsepower on top, almost 25 horsepower on top. So it makes 220 to the wheels. Villain's angle kit, ISR coilovers. I had to do a little bit of modifications on those because they didn't go as low as I wanted. So I changed the springs, running 18K in the front, 16K in the rear. Trans mounts and motor mounts are polyurethane, just so it's not totally solid, but it's, for the most part, stays put. It's a stock turbo S5 keg motor. It's a S5 6-port with turbo 2 irons with a S5 turbo. This is the second S5 turbo that's in here because the first one, it kind of blew up on the dyno and then it shot down to like 5 PSI and held there. But now the new turbo, I rebuilt it, so it's not as much shaft play, but it's leaking again and it only makes like 9 PSI, which is still pretty fast. But I'm getting a new turbo built for it. It's gonna be a 60mm Born Warner turbo. Wanted something a little peppier than the stock one, because the stock one's only a 47 or 48mm, so it's pretty small. I mean, I have AC and everything. I wanted to keep all the kind of creature comforts because this is also my daily. I probably put almost 80,000 miles on it, with it being NA. Motor now has maybe like 4,000 miles, so it's still breaking in. I wanted something super simple, nothing crazy. The interior, I wanted to keep a lot of stock stuff just because it's a daily and I wanted to keep it as stock as possible. The only thing that's changed is seat and steering wheel. Wheels, the brakes, these ones are the S5 Turbo 2 calipers. So they're a Fort Pot piston, and originally, because this was an S5 NA car, it had a single piston up front. And when you'd hit the brakes in the rain, all of a sudden it would lock up the front and you'd slide like 8 feet forward, which is pretty scary in Florida. I wanted to swap over because I heard the swap's not that hard. There's only like one or two bolts that you need to like swap over. I had to rebuild the piston, or rebuild the calipers, because the one caliper on the left side, I was driving, hit the brakes too hard and popped one of the boots off and it just started spearing brake fluid. And I was like, well, I might as well get the rebuild kit. Rebuilt only that side because I needed to go to work the next day and it was already like 10 o'clock and I was already upset about it. I was like, I'm done with this. Rebuilt that side. Next day later, this one goes out and I'm like, all right, sick, gotta do it all over again the next day. And then a couple weeks later, then the rear ones started going. So I had to rebuild those ones, which those ones are still the NA calipers. They're not different to the Turbo 2 ones. They're like the Turbo 2 ones, maybe a bit bigger, just by like an inch. The rear pads, or the pads wise, up front, they're normal non-squealing pads. The rears, because I don't want to use a hydro or anything, I didn't want to swap anything like that and mess up any interior pieces. So I was looking around, I was trying like a million pads. I tried non-squealing, squealing ones, quick stop ones, harsher ones, couldn't find anything. Then a guy in Japan that I was talking on Facebook with, he recommended Project Move pads, and I was like, well, let me give him a shot. So I got they have a Project D1 pads. Those ones are pretty grippy and everything. I do recommend those ones as like not as harsh, but I got the extreme ones because I was like, well, it says extreme, so I hope it stops. So I was like, well, let's see what happens. So I put them on and everything, and you gotta like warm them up a couple of times. You do like a few passes where you're holding it. And there was finally like where they were warmed up and they were kind of gripped up enough, and I was like, well, let's go try it. So I started going like 50 miles per hour. I never had a working handbrake, so like I didn't know how it felt. So I barely like pulled up on it, it instantly locked, and I was like already sideways, and I was like, oh my God, this is like night and day. I originally started drifting with 15s that came on the car, and then I swapped over because 15-inch tires now are getting super expensive for some reason. I don't know what happened, but they were like 40 bucks a piece, and now they're like 75. I didn't know that, so I was like, all right, well, now to change. And I wanted to go a little bit lower, and with the 15s, I couldn't go any lower. So I was like, well, let me do 18s. Found a nice set of 18-inch wheels. 18-inch tires go for like 90 bucks a piece. So like, I was gonna end up paying the same price as the 15, but I was like, you know what, let's just try it. So put the 18s on, and I took the old springs out, put in like 4-inch, I think they're 6-inch ones in the front, and the rears are about 4-inch, 4.5-inch in the rear. And the rears are actually as maxed out as possible, but there's about this much spring droop. So like when I jack up the car, like the whole rear end kind of like drops down to here. I don't think the spring droop kind of like really matters. I think it's all just kind of spring rate. If there's a little bit of droop, I think it's fine. Some people say, yeah, no, droop messes up your whole like drifting or like whole like track setup or just the weight and the feel of the car, but I never had a problem with that. These ones are super advanced 3 spokes. They're 17x9 plus 42, and I have a Volino spacer up front that's a 25 millimeter, just to give it a little bit of poke. And then the rear wheels are Adams Superstars, and they're 17x9 plus 12, and they're 3-piece wheels. What's kind of weird about these wheels is that how most wheels, they're usually like 40 bolts and everything to seat the wheel to the barrel and lip and everything, but these ones are 44, which is kind of weird. I've never seen that, and I was gonna try to rebuild them a little bit bigger. People give them a bad rap because a lot of people don't know how to either take care of them, or they just don't, they don't know what to do. And like most people here, they don't read like the manual of the car, and in the manual, like the first page when you read it, like it explains what to do on this car, and then this thing will live forever. But not a lot of people read it, so OMP is deleted, so I pre-mix all the time. 1 ounce to 1 gallon ratio. For racing, I try to do a 1.5 ounce to 1 gallon, just so it doesn't lean out or an apex seal gets scratched up too bad, or some weird detonation happens where it could have been prevented just with a little bit more premix. When I was looking for cars, I wasn't looking for something like crazy. Originally, I was a big Miata guy. I liked Miatas and everything, and they were fairly cheap in 2017, 2018. You can go get one for like $2,000 or $1,000, and they already have parts and everything done with it. And I was like, well, let me just try to get a Miata because I wanted to start into drifting. I found a Miata. I went through like 8 Miatas and everything, and they're telling me like, yeah, come buy it. And then like I'm halfway there and they're like, yeah, never mind, we just sold it. And I'm like, all right, sick. I'm like 30 minutes away, but thanks for telling me this. So finally some guy was like, all right, you can come get it. I bought it for 1,500 bucks, and it was a white Miata with 220,000 miles on it. It was blowing black smoke. It was rusty. It was bad. And I didn't know how much work and everything like needed to be in that Miata. So I decided it was so rusty and something that I did not want to tackle and everything as a new trying to get into the sport. And I didn't want to tackle something that big real quick. Everything else would have been so much more expensive because everything underneath the car would have had to have been replaced. So I decided, you know what, I'm done with it. Let me see if I can sell it or trade it or whatever. So posted my offer up. Guys were telling me like, hey, do you want a Honda Civic? Do you want a Honda CR-V? Do you want a front wheel drive car? Or do you want this old truck? And I'm like, no, I want a drift car. I want a rear wheel drive car that's manual. And some guy finally said, hey, you want to trade for an RX-7? And I was like, okay, cool. So next day he comes over, check it out, and it was completely stock, bone stock. It had 146,000 miles on it. This motor is technically the second one from Mazda. I guess he got a new reused motor from Mazda that's already been rebuilt and everything, put in the car. And I didn't know that until I took it to a shop and everything, and he said, hey, this isn't the original motor. And I was like, okay, so what motor is it? It's the same motor that goes into the car, it's just the second one from Mazda. So I was like, okay, cool. And when he compression tested and everything, it had 101 on each apex seal, which is phenomenal for rotaries. And I was like, oh, that's great. Like, I thought originally the rear rotor was kind of like low on power, and I thought it was kind of like dying. So I was like, oh, I'm probably gonna need to rebuild it soon. But after he tells me that, I was like, oh, maybe it's just me. I'm driving at a different style now, that I'm getting to the point where I'm going faster than the car than it can handle. And like, I'm trying to push it harder and it won't do the things that I want it to do. So that's when a couple years later, a year later, I got into drifting. I went out to a small parking lot out in the rain in the middle of nowhere, and I was like, well, let's just give it a try. Did donuts with an open diff and everything. Nothing crazy. All I had was max Pediron coilovers, the brace bars for the rear and front. Other than that, that was about it. Had fun and drifted it for a bit, and then every like week it would rain, because Florida, it's a rainy state. It just downpours 24/7. So every day I would basically go out to the lot and just do donuts, have fun, do all this stuff. And that's when like I just pretty much learned how to drift in the rain, and it was so much more fun. In the dry, it's a little different. It's a little more harder. You have to kind of keep the momentum going. But if you learn in the rain, it's a little bit easier, because most tracks, like sometimes they'll wet it down or sometimes it'll rain during the track. So helps out save on tires, helps on save on like trying to learn how to drift. And it's just a better experience overall. And you're going fast on the outside, but on the inside, like you're going so slow around stuff. It's such a good practice. The body kit I got 3 years ago. 3 years ago. Some guy on Facebook Marketplace, I was sharing around because I wanted a body kit. Most body kits right now are like $2-3 grand for this car. And to ship either overseas or here, it's $3 grand, $4 grand to get it here. And the wait time was like 6 to 8 months. And I was like, yeah, I don't have that money and I don't have that time. So I was like, well, let's just go on Facebook Marketplace and see what they have. Typed in body kits, didn't find anything for a couple of weeks. And a few weeks later, I searched up body kits and everything and found this guy in Port St. Lucie. He had this kit listed for like 400 bucks. And I kind of negotiated him down to like 220 bucks. And it's an original GS, I think it's a GPO kit or something like that. It's an original one. It was in the box and everything. Like he had box, paperwork and all that for it. And he said he bought it like for his 89 FC, but crashed it, never used it, so he just kept it in his house. Finally, he was like, well, let me just get rid of some stuff. So he started getting rid of stuff. So I hit him up. And he said, hey, there's another guy that wants to come get it later today if you don't want it. I was like, I'm coming right now. So hopped in the Subaru, drove all the way there, gave him 220, and this kit is from '89, and it's a GPS or GSPS kit. I don't remember what style it is. It's starts with something with a G. That's all I know. But on the inside of the bumpers, you can see like the tag of who made it and all that. Originally, the people that make that kit now went underneath a different name called DR, and this is a old school DR kit. And I got it for $220, and the guy was like, do you want other stuff too? And he had an exhaust and all that, and I was like, well, I mean, how much are you selling everything for? He goes, just give me 20 bucks, take it all. And I was like, all right, sick. So I'm like stuffing stuff in the Subaru. I put the exhaust, because it's a dual exhaust, I put it on top of the Subaru, ratchet strapped it around, and I drove home. And it was really funny because how the wind was going into the exhaust, it would whistle. So like on the way home, this thing is just like whistling while I'm driving, and like it's just so annoying. I tried to mock up the kit without cutting it first. I cracked it once, and I was like, okay, maybe let me just trim a little bit just to like do it. But I did that the next day, got it to fit, and it looked perfect. Last year in September, that's when I decided, you know what? I want more power. I want to go faster. And I feel like I'm limited on what I can do with this car. So I was like, well, let's see if I can turbo it. So I had a buddy of mine, he helped me get pieces and all that stuff to like hodgepodge a turbo kit, but make it go off of the Turbo 2 ECU. So I didn't have to go with a standalone ECU. But at the end of the day, I would have to gone with the standalone ECU because it never ran after that. I tried to crank it up a couple of times. It would like putter a little bit and then it'd stop. It didn't work out how I thought it would have worked out, but in the long run, if you're gonna turbo this, do it the right way. Try not to do it the half-assed way, how I did it, whereas I tried to do as much stock stuff as possible and basically rewire it myself. If you're gonna do it right. If you're gonna use stock stuff, do all the stock stuff and also get a standalone ECU so you can tune everything and you can get rid of all of the MAF and all the little sensors that you don't need. And it's 1,000 times better than trying to make it work with all the stock stuff. It never worked right after that. The future goals for this, with the new turbo and everything that I'm getting built for the car, I want to make like 280, 300 horsepower. That's quite a lot for a rotary. It's like for a rotary, 300 horsepower is like 600 for a V8. It's fast, it's like a rocket ship. I want to make it as kind of simple as possible. When I come to drift events, I try to bring like almost nothing. Like if I need stuff, I'll bring like little tools to do like tune-ups and all that, or like if something bad breaks and all that, I have those tools and everything. But tires wise, I want to bring like a pair of tires to a drift event and last the whole drift event, and then go to work the next day, swap out the tires, and then my tires are fine for a whole nother like month. Try to keep it as simple as possible, keep drifting really fun. I don't want to do too much competitive stuff. Like I want to get more into competitive things. Like I want to drive like a few like big events and everything, but I want to do a lot of like grassroots showing and just have fun with the car. Like a lot of people, they overbuild their cars and they're not bringing it to the track, and they're at home working on this car trying to make 1,000 horsepower, whereas they could have brought out their 100 horsepower cars and just try to link it and try to get comfortable with it. And after a while, like they'll get the hang of it and everything. Like there's a lot of new people and everything that think that you need like 200, 300 horsepower to get around a track, or like a skid pad like this one here in Orlando. You don't need that much power to slide a corner. Like even even if it rains, like out in a parking lot, if you know where something's good, where you're able to like go out to a parking lot, try to do a few donuts, like it's perfect. Like you're just trying to get into it, because what if you're building that 1,000 horsepower car, all of a sudden you don't like that car anymore after you go drive it for the first time and you're like, this car is too much now. Now you're stuck with it because you've sunk all this money into it, and now you're like, well, I have to learn it like this now, and now it's even more trickier. I mean, this is my daily for now 6 going on 7 years now. I've only missed about 3 drift events in 3 years. So I drive like almost every 2 weeks, every month when they have a drift event, just so I know it's good. And like also sometimes like it's a little scary going to work sometimes like after the drift event, because how hard I run it and everything. And I go to try to start it and it takes a minute and I'm like, all right, maybe it won't start today, maybe it won't, or maybe it will. Definitely want a cage to take people with me and tandem and all that. More horsepower. I want to rebuild some crazy wheels. I want to make some deep wheels. The spec wheels that I'm trying to fit under stock body is 18 by 10.5 plus 12 with a 5-inch lip. So I'm trying to make it as like stretched as possible. I want to repaint it and everything. I don't know what color yet. I'm thinking about a 2-tone color with a lot of sparkles. So there's either that or flames or something like that. I might do something crazy. Or it'll just be Mazda white again, but with some really deep chrome wheels. Car was in a crash. It's been in a crash once, so it's been backed into once. It's been crashed in the front once. And I guess the guy that previously owned it, it was tweaked in the front and the frame was a little bent. So I bent the frame over, so the frame's like sort of straight, not really straight, but it's straight enough. My goal with this is to, once I make it pretty, that is the last time it's gonna be pretty. Like after that, if something breaks on it, I'm putting a zip tie in it and I'm not gonna fix it until the thing looks like a beet soda can and I'm like done. And then after that, I'm gonna go ahead and once after 2 years of like demolishing it and everything, then I'll try to fix it and see like if I can do anything. If I need to do over fenders after that, I can just cut the body if it's crumpled like a can, cut it, throw fiberglass side rear and front fiberglass over fenders, and I don't have to do anything. I think it's my class now, so I'm gonna go drift. I'll see you guys later.